In today's episode, we're going to have the challenging task of going through the 1990 decade and deciding what is the best rap album from each and every single year from the 90s, guys. So listen, if you are new to NFR Podcast, hit that subscribe button. We're doing content like this on a weekly basis. Plus, if you guys want to hear a bit more about our recommendations, us going back to classic decades, and even some new stuff that we're bumping, check out our exclusive audio podcast that's only on Spotify, Apple, and wherever else you can listen to audio podcasts. The link is in the description. Baloo, let's get into this, man. This was a massive episode, and honestly, one of my favorites to prepare for, bro. It was awesome.
Absolutely, bro. It was so cool to go back to the 90s because to me, it is the best decade for hip-hop. You have ultimate classics, and let's start off with 1990 because in my opinion, it's the start of the decade. Hip-hop is still new around this time, and it's probably the weakest year out of everything we have. But you still have classics like A Fear of a Black Planet by Public Enemy, which has like over 200 samples, super politically driven.
Not only that, Step in the Arena by Gangstar is another favorite for me for that year. That was an honorable mention. People's Instinctive Travels in the Paths of a Rhythm by A Tribe Called Quest. That's a massive album. It was actually their debut too in 1990. But speaking about a debut album, that's what I'm going to have as my favorite and what I think is the best for 1990. And this is America's Most Wanted by Ice Cube. And what I think is so interesting about this album, man, is that this is the album that came fresh off of like the whole Ruthless Records sort of feud where he left NWA and now he started up his solo career. And this is one of the most important albums of the 90s, especially with the whole social talk and starting to get into also the gang violence of where Ice Cube's from. And it caused an entire inspiration for MCs to start to dive into that content matter from their own burrows for different albums down the line. So why do you think this album is so important to the hip-hop genre?
I also chose it as the best of 1990, and I mean, I just think that it was impressive for Ice Cube to go solo and be able to have such an impactful album without the helping hand of Dr. Dre. And he apparently even wanted Dre to like produce this album, but there were too many confusions and sort of issues with the whole Ruthless Records situation. Jerry Heller apparently like vetoed Dre being able to produce for this record.
Well, you know what's interesting about this
production is still fire
because it comes from the Bomb Squad from Public Enemy, and they took care of the entire project. And
what's cool is that you kind of get a blend of like East Coast production styles with the West Coast funk in terms of the samples that were used. So you get those chaotic beats that sound like something you would have heard off of It Takes a Nation of Millions, but you also get that funk element, which is also really dope. But I just love how cinematic this album is, bro. Like it literally really starts with Cube being sent to the electric chair, bro.
It does. But like that's the whole thing about the album though, is that Ice Cube was in a position where he felt like he was getting scrutinized by the public. I mean, the whole feud was going overboard, and that fueled also the political like consciousness of the album itself, and like having that content matter fused together for the entire track list was not only revolutionary for its time, but I felt like it added a sort of punch that no albums in the those early 90s really had. Like Ice Cube was really in your face throughout the entire project as well. His mic presence is better than ever, and it's obviously
he had like this big bully attitude, I feel like, towards the whole record, and just the topics that he's covering, from like dice games turning deadly to like robbing, rich folks in the suburbs. Like everything that he covered was super cool just because it was refreshing.
Not only that, but I'm not sure if you ever noticed this, but there's actually an Easter egg on Endangered Species where he actually calls all of the violence and riots that ended up happening in 1992.
The Rodney King situation.
He calls it like within Endangered Species, and it was just like, listen, where I'm from, it's going to become extremely, extremely dangerous at a certain point, and then 2 years later after the album release, well, you get the 1992 LA riots. So just to say though, like the writing on this album, it's deep, it's cinematic, and it just keeps you engaged throughout the entire project.
Absolutely, and it was just like, it was so fitting to get the best MC from NWA to give us this solo album and sort of maintain that signature gangster rap style where he's giving you that inner rage and that ferocious delivery throughout. And there's amazing songs on here like Drive By, like Gangsta's Fairy Tale. So really good album there, but let's move on to 1991. And this is where shit gets a bit more competitive, all right? Because you got Death Certificate by Ice Cube, which was a contender for me.
We Can't Be Stopped by Ghetto Boys
De
as
La
well.
Soul is Dead by De La Soul.
OG Original Gangster by Ice-T
Naughty
as well.
by Nature by Naughty by Nature.
Tupacalypse Now by Tupac.
But I think we know where this is going, though. Like this was like an easy front runner for A Tribe Called Quest to come in and to give us this classic fucking album, bro. I mean, if you like listening to bass lines, like the bass lines on the Low End Theory are good enough to make your ears come.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
I
Like,
like that.
that's the level that it's on this
And
record.
not only that, but all of the jazz samples mixed in with the drum breaks as well.
And
Makes for
the super crazy blend of sort of bass and drum breaks together, bro. Like the
It was
combination.
crazy, yeah. No one ever really heard that type of production before until Q-Tip made it popular. But what's fun about this album too is that they weren't even supposed to make this because Phife Dawg actually learned that he had diabetes and he didn't want to make music anymore. But what ended up happening was that Q-Tip really wanted to move quicker and he kind of pushed the group to be able to make something that was far and beyond anything that they ever created. And you end up getting the low end theory. And what's cool too is that if you like alternative rap and you like to chill out at the same time where it's also accessible, this is ahead of its time. Like
Yeah.
I recommend this to every single hip hop listener. Does not matter the age. Please go listen to this.
This is one of the albums that really shaped my music taste. I'm not gonna lie to you, bro. Like I wasn't always into jazz rap when I was first getting into the genre, but seeing what they did here and seeing how quirky they were in terms of their flows and delivery on something like Verses from the Abstract, where you even have like Ron Carter playing live bass and you have just these super inspiring I would say mic approaches from Phife and Q-Tip, you're just blown away, and it kind of opened the door for me to check out music from De La Soul or music from Common and other jazz rap artists. So
not only that, but
I'm thankful for that.
Especially the chemistry between Q-Tip and Phife Dawg is at full display. Like the interplay and like all of the lines that they have connected at certain points. Not only that, but there's a sort of like humor to the album as well if you actually go through the writing and actually pay attention to certain bars. But listen, I think it's a fantastic album. It's an all-time great. I mean, you go through any single like list from a major publication, the Low End Theory will be included into it because I mean it's just that important.
Yeah,
as
they
an
literally
album.
perfected, the genre fusions of jazz and rap, and I think that when it comes to this album, they elevated from their previous album in terms of the concepts, the songwriting, the production. I mean, even like them rapping about like the date rape drug. The date rape drug wasn't even like that much of a popular culture phenomenon until later on in the 90s, but they were early on that shit. So I just feel like in so many different
And, like,
aspects, they were ahead of the game.
Like, how did they do that? Was it more in, let's say, like a social commentary way where like they were advising people about it? Like that's what they ended up doing?
Yeah,
with
they
it?
kind of just gave a story about it, bro, on the record.
Oh, that's
so.
fire.
It was cool, and Check the Rhyme is just one of the best examples of that call and response sort of synergy between Phife and Q-Tip, and it's just some of the best laid back rapping you'll find in the entire decade. So definitely a special album. But let's move on to 1992 and another stacked year in my opinion. And this is gonna surprise you for my answer because I didn't go with The Chronic.
You didn't go with The Chronic.
did
Okay,
not
because
go with
you
The
have The
Chronic.
Predator, you have Don't Sweat the Technique by Eric B. and Rakim. You also have Bizarre Side 2 by The Far Side, Mecca and the Soul Brothers by P Rock and CL Smooth. Like, you have some serious classics within this
Did
year.
you go
but
with The Chronic?
I went with The Chronic.
Okay, so what makes you think that The Chronic is the best album?
I think it's revolutionary.
It
I
is.
think it brought G-Funk to a whole different area. Not only that, but like you were talking about with Public Enemy, like hip hop was in a very like sample heavy sort of production state. And what was cool about The Chronic is that besides one or two samples, it was all live instrumentation being done by Dr. Dre. Not only that, but the mixing and mastering and the sonics of the album were completely advanced for its time as well. It was also this sort of like trampoline moment for Snoop Dogg to come through, one of the most legendary rappers that the genre has ever seen, and make an entrance on that end. Not only that, but you want to talk about cinematic value within a rap album, one of the most cinematic albums from the 1990s. Like, it's so hard to, let's say, stack anything else up against this one. Like everything's working for The Chronic.
Not only that, but like without The Chronic, do you really get Snoop Dogg's career? Do you get the whole Tupac Death Row era? Do you get eventually 50
because
Cent
this
and
is-
Eminem? Like this was
absolutely.
the album that gave that second life to Dr. Dre.
And this is what's cool too, is that like Kanye West wrote about the album's production quality when Rolling Stones did the Immortals list for the greatest artists of all time, and Dr. Dre was included. And he had this to say about the album: The Chronic is still the hip hop equivalent to Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life. It's the benchmark you measure your album against if you're serious. And that's how I feel about it, is like, you can't touch this album. It's like, it's up there in the mecca of hip hop for me, and that's why I had to have it as my contender.
Yeah, it's definitely my second choice, but after doing some re-listens and tapping back in with CL Smooth and P Rock, I had to go with Mecca and the Soul Brother, which is an absolutely classic album for me all the way through. I love the concept of the album about like finding your inner Mecca and sort of looking inwards and sort of like understanding yourself so that you could have a great viewpoint of life itself. And I think that when it comes to jazz rap and boom bap and using samples to their finest qualities, P-Rock mastered that. Not only that, but I feel like this album was also revolutionary just because usually when you had, let's say, Eric B and Rakim or other rapper-producer duos, you didn't have the producer rapping, besides maybe like Mobb Deep and some other groups.
Well, Gangstar at the time was doing that as well.
Yeah, but I think that P-Rock was actually the first to have like his own ad-libs on the track.
Oh, that's pretty
which
cool.
is pretty
I never knew
cool.
that.
Not only that, but I just feel like the verses all throughout here, bro, are flawless. If it's, you know, CL and P-Rock rapping about just them boasting about their mic skills or them giving you food for thought, you have classic songs on here like Ghettos of the Mind where it sort of plays out like a horror story of someone's damaged mind who feels like they're stuck in the ghetto and who has to, you know, sell hell to pay their rent.
You know what's cool about
this
this album is that I did a bit of background research on this album just because I was interested, and apparently like they didn't like get that much acclaim after they dropped the album. Like it actually didn't sell too well when they released.
It didn't. Like they had the lead single, They Reminisce Over You, which is one of the greatest hip hop songs of all time. But apart from that, I mean, it did not sell that well at all, surprisingly. But at the end of the day, there's so much chemistry, bro. And I think that even when you're looking at like the unique song structures, it's so cool because you're getting 3 verses on almost every song, but there's no actual hooks for the most part. Like you have these drum breaks or you have the samples that are sort of guiding you as the hooks for these tracks. And it's just an amazing, soulful experience.
You know what's crazy too is that like the critical reception around this, because I was going back to read old reviews about the album, and people didn't necessarily like it off of first listen because it reminded them too much like Gangstar, and they were like, "Oh, they're just trying to copy their formula." And now you look back, like,
and it's better than some of those Gangstar albums.
Absolutely, like you're like, "Whoa, okay, this is really advanced for its time." So listen, I'm not mad at you.
And I think that CL Smooth as an MC is also underrated, just because yes, he had the charisma, he had the suave essence to him.
The mic presence was so cool.
But bro, it's the way that he rapped with the metaphors and the symbolism. Like for example, if you look at a song like Anger in the Nation, he raps, "Here's a situation from a darker view. Night and day, salt and pepper in the earthly stew. But the salt think it tastes better, straight up superior. Therefore the flavor of the pepper's inferior. Incorrect though, giving some heartburn. Level of a devil, better wait your turn. And here is one recollection of imperfection. No one should be judged by complexion." Like just talking about racial inequalities through the symbol of salt and pepper.
Well,
like,
not only that, but
genius
it is. You know what's cool
writing.
about that? You know what's cool about that as well? That little passage that you ended up going through. If you pay attention to how every single line connects, it's kind of like a lead-in rhyme where everything has this sort of like interconnected rhyme scheme, but also with the content. And listen, man, I'm not mad at you for putting it over The Chronic because it is truly underrated.
Underrated and revolutionary as well.
But the thing is that I'm not putting it over The Chronic.
Because you know what it is?
I'm not putting
this
it over
album
The Chronic.
has all-time great songs, just like The Chronic does with Nothing But a G Thing. Like it has those songs that reach that level to me. But you guys let us know in the comments. Is that a hot take? I don't know. Let's move on to 1993, where we have heavy contenders. We have Midnight Marauders by a Tribe Called Quest.
Doggy Style by Snoop Dogg. Black Sunday by Cypress Hill. Strictly 4 by Tupac, excuse me. So, I mean, you could go through these albums and just find quality and classics like across the entire board. So, where do you want to start, bro, with 36 Chambers? I mean, it's not even a competition.
It's not even a competition, bro. I mean, like, this is just the album that truly gave New York its identity for hardcore hip-hop. And even going back to this album now and listening to other group projects, I don't feel like there's any group that's as diverse, like individually, MC for MC. Like you look at a song like Shame On It, for example, and you have ODB that comes in with like these ad-libs and these jumpy flows. Then you get Method Man who has this cocky and confident energy and wordplay. Then you have Raekwon that just sounds like a fucking mob boss. Like they all had their own unique skill sets and voices that just mesh so fucking well.
Not only
on this
that,
album.
but what's cool is that the rawness of the album actually comes from them not having that much of a budget for the album. Like they had to really record with limited equipment. They only recorded within one studio that was super tight. And if you go back and listen to, let's say, old studio session stories, like they'd be like 9 Wu members at the same time within the same studio. And what's cool too is that there's sort of like a competitive edge within the album for rapping performances. And what RZA used to do is that if you wanted to make the track, you guys used to have to rap battle each other, and then that's how it ended up happening.
And that's what you get on songs like Seventh Chamber, where it feels like everyone's competing for the best verse, and you get this mirage of just punchlines and wordplay where it literally feels like, for how quickly and in your face the bars are, it sort of feels like they're blurring out these speech bubbles from comic books, bro, just because of how much personality is exploding off of the mic. And yeah, going through the track list, bro. how many classic songs do you have on here? Like, way too many.
Bring the Ruckus,
Tears.
Cream, bro. Yeah, there's way too many good songs on here for it to like not be considered as an album of the year contender for this year. Low key, you could put it as one of the best of the decade. I had it in my top 10 albums of all time list.
Absolutely, so did I. And if you guys want to hear more about Enter the 36 Chambers, you guys could check out our episode that we did on the top 10 best rap albums, of all time. But yeah, this is just a flawless album, one of the most creative hip hop albums ever.
Absolutely. So let's keep going on with this. Let's go on to 1994, and again, I don't think that it's going to be anything else besides Illmatic for me.
But you could have put Ready to Die by Biggie. You could have also put The Diary by Scarface.
Hard to Earn by Gangstar is another big one for me as well.
Did Gangstar crack your list today?
No, it didn't.
No, it didn't. But they came close in like every year.
Absolutely, because they were actually super dominant within the 90s as well. Even Regulate by Warren G. That's an all-time classic for the G-Funk era. But I mean, what is there not to talk about with Illmatic? I mean, we've spoken so many times on the podcast about this incredible album and just the influence that it had, and just how revolutionary it was also for just the writing style that, Nas presented on here. Just being able to have a foot in, but also foot out of like the gangster life perspective, where he's in Queens, New York, and he's kind of giving you the window view of everything and kind of being the passenger rather than giving you kind of more of like the in-seat content that you might find on something like Ready to Die by Biggie, where he's actually taking you through the actions and everything that comes with it. But what's interesting is that, like, I believe it was at the Live at the Barbecue session where like Nas really got like discovered and people really started to, pay attention to Nas and like what he was able to do in 1991. And then
that was the one song that really like made Nas' stature.
Absolutely. And then after that, you get Halftime that, ends up, I'm not sure if it was released at the time or not, but I know
it was a single. Yeah,
it was a single, but DJ Premier ended up hearing it and he was like, I have to be on this album. Like, I have to be able to craft a certain soundscape for Illmatic. And that's where everything kind of started with.
Yeah, this is just like the most timeless hip-hop album. It's the greatest hip-hop album of all time to me. I mean, the multi-syllabic rhyme schemes. Nas was just rapping at this level that no other MC had reached in New York or anywhere else across the states. Not only that, but I just feel like Nas made his words tangible. He made the feelings that he was experiencing all tangible for you, where he's heightening your senses because of how well he's painting all of these pictures on songs like One Time for Your Mind or on songs like One Love. Like, he is just such a great descriptive writer, and he was sort of acting as that ghetto reporter, just looking at everything from a bird's eye view and also giving you that perspective of feeling trapped.
Not only that, but if you look at the way that he was able to like deliver his flows and the cadences, it's very reminiscent of, let's say, something like, a Rakim flow or even Cool G Rap or Daddy Kane, but he had his own twist with it to where it was super smooth and accessible, but it was hard, it was menacing. It, like, as you said, it took your senses to a whole different level and you wanted to listen to everything Nas had to say.
Absolutely. And it just felt like the first album where you're getting flawless, first person narratives, where you're really living through the Queensbridge projects through his eyes and through his view. And yeah, it raised hip hop to this bar. Like, he took it to the moon, bro, in terms of lyrical substance and the genre.
Imagine Boom Bap having this type of producer cast,
Large
bro.
Professor, P-Rock,
DJ Premier, Q-Tip, and LES, bro. Like, what else do you want? And it's a glitch. It's a cheat code of an album, to be honest.
It's also living so well. Like, you watch shows like Ozark. I don't know if you've seen that show. Amazing. But like, there's Illmatic sprinkled all throughout the episodes of that show because of how timeless it is, bro.
Not only that, but I feel like the writing also just kind of, it goes even beyond hip hop, to be quite honest with you. With this album, it's much different. Like, you guys have to experience it.
Like, this is the rap album for people that don't like hip hop, in my opinion. Like, you cannot like the genre whatsoever, but you'll fall in love with this album just because of how well done and well made it is.
It is, absolutely. But let's go on to 1995. This is a very interesting list, actually. So halfway through the decade now, 1995. Listen, my honorable mentions were The Infamous by Mobb Deep. That didn't make it for my album of the year that year. Liquid Swords by GZA. Only Built for Cuban Links by Raekwon. Return to the 36 Chambers by Old Dirty Bastard. Those are just
Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous by Big L.
Absolutely. Like, this is also like a solo Wu-Tang album year. Like, I was going through the decade, I'm like, sheesh, this year in particular had a lot of, because
you had ODB's record that year too, I think.
Absolutely,
bro. Yeah.
Yes. Return to the 36 Chambers ended up dropping in 1995.
Yeah, it was a stacked year.
It was a stacked year.
Maybe the second most stacked year out of this 90s decade, bro. Like,
the next year's gonna be pretty stacked.
I think 1996 was the toughest for competition, but ultimately with 95, I ended up going with The Infamous by Mobb Deep.
I went with Me Against the World by
Me
Tupac.
Against the World.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Well, it cracked my top 10, albums of all time
Yeah,
list.
true.
It's one of my favorite of the genre. I think it was just also an interesting time for Tupac because he was incarcerated when this album ended up dropping. And basically what had happened is that he used all of that fuel and all of that anger to put it into more of like this political consciousness sort of writing that you see from Tupac here. And it's very different than All Eyes on Me because All Eyes on Me is a lot more gangster rap oriented. It's a lot more aggressive and vicious as a record. Whereas if this, it's still like vicious in a certain way, but you're starting to see that like he's taking a different type of approach with it, where you start to see him kind of like he's eerie about certain things. He's very, very skeptical about certain things. Example, If I Die Tonight, one of my favorite hip hop songs of all time. Like he's almost paranoid, bro, and you feel that paranoia from him. And then he gets a lot more softer on certain records like Dear Mama, where that song is revolutionary and was one of the first like popular rap records that was ever dedicated towards a mother, and that inspired Kanye and so many other artists. So I mean, you have all of that blended together with this beautiful track list that is super short. Well, not short, but it's concise. It feels like a concise album in my opinion.
Yeah,
so that's why I had to choose.
I think it is Tupac's most concise album. I think it's also his deepest album, his most emotionally evoked album, and I think it's his best album. And it was close to put it second place, but ultimately I had to go with The Infamous by Mobb Deep. And I think that not a lot of people would have this at number one for this year, but it's just the grittiest and darkest New York hip hop album that I've heard. And I think that like even listening now to music, especially like the underground sound, I don't think you would have the whole Griselda movement if it wasn't for albums like The Infamous, just because of the type of instrumentals you got from Havoc, where you have these eerie, piano keys, you have these haunting strings, and you have this classic boom bap to match it. And I think that what's really special about this album is the type of state of mind it puts you in, where you feel like you're getting handed like the same way that like soldiers get handed a manual when they're like recruits to go into the military. It feels like you're getting a manual for the ghetto, bro. It feels like you're really being handed this manual in terms of like, this is what you have to do to survive the streets. And it's mind-blowing to see how they evoke empathy out of you, bro. Like on certain songs, for example, like Up North Trip, you literally feel like these guys are paranoid and that they don't know if they're going to live to see another day, but they accept their fate. And it's such a cool perspective where they also feel trapped the same way that Nas did, but they're also embracing their lifestyle. And there's this lingering atmosphere, bro, around this track list where it's very haunting and you feel like something's going to creep up on you as you're listening. You feel like you don't know what's going to come next because every single song has the sound effects of like gun spraying or shootouts or just these really creepy situations that could take place. And when you look at the classics on here, Shook Ones Part 2, when you look at Survival of the Fittest, when you look at everything that they were able to accomplish, it was groundbreaking, bro, for its time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had it at like my second for honorable mentions, but I ultimately went with Me Against the World. So guys, let me know what's your favorite album of 1995. But okay, let's go on to the toughest year.
Let's go to the contenders first.
Yeah,
The Score by the Fugees, Illadelph Half-Life by The Roots, All Eyes on Me by Tupac, Reasonable Doubt by Jay-Z, AT-Aliens by Outkast,
Hell on Earth by Mobb Deep as well. That's another fantastic project. But ultimately, you just named my my album of the year for this year. I went AT-Aliens.
I went It Was Written by Nas.
That's very interesting.
The only person to have two albums on my decade list.
You see, I was going back and forth between It Was Written and, AT-Aliens. And ultimately, I do think that It Was Written is the better written album. I do think that you do have certain performances that out-trump each other. But what I like about AT-Aliens is that it kind of stands alone out of any other album up to this point in the hip-hop genre. And that was kind of the context that I was going in with, was that if AT-Aliens doesn't drop, like, what happens to, like, the South and the music that comes out of there? And, how does this sort of catapult Outkast into a completely different direction into their career? Because the whole, like, sort of, I would say, criticism with Outkast back then, and you saw this at the Source Awards, was like, oh, these guys are from the South. Like, they're only known for, like, bass music. But Outkast had a lot more of a sort of skill set to offer than just that. And not only that, but the content matter is super unique. They're kind of acting as like these extraterrestrial sort of characters within, this social sort of setting, and they're going through different songs and they're just having so much fun with it. And not only that, but this was actually one of the first albums where they actually tried to do their own production. So Andre 3K ended up doing Elevators, and I believe it's also Jazzy Bell, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And then after that, just looking at like sort of the concepts of something like Elevators, where they're taking you through the highs and the lows of their fame and where they're getting towards. Like, it was really cool to see that type of writing because it was never really done like that before. And sort of seeing what it did for the South, I do feel like it has an important place. Like, it's a standalone record out of any other one for me.
Yeah, it's definitely super cool to have seen them evolve the way that they did with AT Aliens and give you this spacey type of feeling and sound.
Not only that, but there's like this major sort of influence of like dub and reggae over every single production that they sort of laid down. And even on other Outkast albums, reggae was always a big inspiration for the way that Andre 3000 attacked his sound, and you could hear it throughout the entire track list. So one of my favorites for sure.
Ultimately, I had to go It Was Written just because Nas came back with a vengeance, bro. Like, he starts off this album wanting to claim that King of New York spot at a time where you were competing with New York in its prime. You had Jay-Z, you had Prodigy, you had Biggie, you had the guys from The Wu. I mean, you had all of these competitors, and Nas was still going for that title. And in 1996, he earned the King of New York title, even though I think that Biggie kind of held on to that for as long as he was alive. But nonetheless, I just love the way that Nas decided to take so many calculated risks with this album. Like, looking at a song, for example, like Street Dreams, he literally took an 80s, synth pop song, which is, Dreams Are Made of This, and turned it into this mafioso rap record. Or even looking at something like The Message, for example, he's taking these Latin strings that are sampled from Stink's song, which I think is called Shape of My Heart, that Lucid Dreams ended up sampling too, and gave you these strings that were never heard before on hip hop records.
Not only that, but you go to something like Nas Is Coming and linking up with Dr. Dre in the middle of the feud to be able to like have
the
that.
First East Coast rapper Dre ever links with. That was also a groundbreaking moment. Not only that, but looking at records like If I Ruled the World, you're getting one of the best choruses ever from Lauryn Hill on that song.
And Power is an incredible storytelling song where he personifies a gun. Like, yeah, there's a lot of quality.
There's genius concepts. I think concepts that are maybe more well thought out than what you're getting on AT Aliens. Just to compare in terms of like why I had to put it at number one. Not only that, but you're getting one of the best posse cuts ever with Affirmative Action. And I just love the fact that Nas sort of viewed the landscape of New York hip hop and said, okay, you know what? Mafioso rap is what people are sort of gravitating towards. Let me get into that bag and do it at the highest level. And that transition from more conscious, hip hop to this mafioso rap was seamless, bro.
I think I went with like the sort of exclusivity factor and like how unique AT Alien sounds in comparison to the rest of the records that were released.
I feel that, yeah, it was super unique.
And that's why I ended up going, like, it's such a revolutionary record and kind of catapulted everything for like the alternative rap scene and kind of put it into a whole different place. So extremely stacked year, but 1997 was a massive year as well.
Big year again.
But I mean, it was on the lower side though, but you do have some serious contenders. So example, the 18th Letter by Rakim, that is a fantastic project.
Wu-Tang Forever.
Absolutely. One Day It All Makes Sense by Common as
In
well.
My Lifetime Volume 1, Jay-Z, Super Duper Fly, Missy Elliott. But ultimately,
yeah, After Death.
Life After Death by Biggie. This was just a phenomenon of an album, bro. I mean, even the fact that like it's a continuation of Ready to Die when you're looking at like the way the album starts off
with
where
Suicidal Thoughts, yeah.
And it's like Biggie's coming back as the boogeyman, the man that came in with this fucking smasher of an album that scared off so many other people in the hip-hop space, and now he's back to do more fucking damage. And when you're looking at the whole concept of a double album, to this day, no one's executed an album as powerful as Life After Death.
Well, All Eyes on Me, too.
I don't think it's as strong. I still think Life After Death is the best double album of all time.
I would go.
You put All Eyes on Me over it.
I put it like right there with it. Like All Eyes on Me is a serious double album as well. But also the approach with the album was cool too, because yes, the album got dark, but at the same time, Biggie said that he wanted to make an album that was even more accessible than Ready to Die.
And it was, because you had those like commercially successful, radio-friendly songs like Mo Money, Mo Problems or Hypnotize, but I mean, you could even argue that this is Biggie in prime form. A lot of people think this is better than Ready to Die, and it's just because his skills as an MC only improved. Like, you look at Notorious Thugs, bro, and like the fucking 10 different flow switches he has on that song.
But the song concepts are
away.
Genius as well, even going to something like 10 Crack Commandments and giving you 10 different rules on, how to sell crack and also sustain in there. Like, that's just so interesting. Absolutely. It's just so interesting to witness. Even the sample flips, like going to something like Sky's the Limit. Like, I was playing that on the car ride over here, and man, it still sounds good like over 30 years later. And that's what I love about this album, man. It's just there's so much replay value. you. There's so like, where do you want to go, bro? There's just too many tracks to even reference.
Also,
Kick in the Door is crazy too. You know, Kick in the Door I think was actually my introduction to this album because I was so drawn in by the skit at the beginning. I love the skits throughout this entire album where like you have the rapper on the game show and he's like, you know, my shit's John Blaze like that, and then after that, tell them how you feel, and then boom, it just ends up going through, and it sounds like this fucking bounce, bro, you know, and it's just it's crazy. As a young hip hop fan, I have to say, like, this album gave me so much
and
value.
this album proved to me as well that like he can be rapping alongside Bone Thugs and Harmony, he could be rapping alongside Jay-Z, could be rapping alongside pretty much anybody, bro, and even the Locks, and he can outbar all of them. Like, this is the album that proved to me that Biggie's maybe never been outbarred, which is pretty fucking impressive. And even looking at songs like Somebody's Gotta Die, like just masterclass of storytelling that you get later on songs like Kick in the Door as well. And I think that you're also getting inspirational songs from Biggie on something like Sky's the Limit, bro.
I love that song.
Where he's taking, you know, a message that his mother gave him and sort of applying it to his own life. And you have...
I like the way that he starts that song too, like Ashy to Classy. I really do. Yeah, it's an iconic song, and listen, I do think it is the best of this year. Absolutely.
2 years left, though.
1998. Listen, this is another stacked year. Honorable mentions I had was The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, At Capital Punishment by
both
Big Pun.
DMX albums.
Absolutely. Black Star by Mos Def and Talib Kweli. 40 Days and 40 Nights by Exhibit as well. That's a fantastic
Moment of
project.
Truth, Gangstar.
Absolutely. That, you see, that was in contention with me with the Lauryn Hill album, but ultimately I went to Aquemini by Outkast.
I went Aquemini by Outkast.
Fire! I thought you were
too.
gonna do the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill.
No, I had Aquemini even higher on my top 10 of all time list, but yeah, this is just another example of Outkast saying, fuck it, let's change up our whole style once again. And that's what they did here, bro. They kind of went after this whole Motown sound and brought in way more live instrumentals than ever. And I just love the fact that this is like their most musical album. Not only that, but this is their album where they're going way more into Black Plight and sort of giving you these super important, powerful messages.
Not
all
only
throughout.
that, but what's cool is that like they kind of took the blueprint of AT Aliens, but also enhanced it to a certain extent, because you do get that sort of like science fiction sort of element to their music also within it, but it's done in a different way, as you said, with like the politically conscious lyrics and everything else that goes into it. But what's cool is that like for this album, they had a lot more time to create it. AT Aliens was a massive commercial success, so they ended up having more money, and what they actually ended up doing is that Andre 3000 took care of the entire production and Big Boy took care of every single hook on the album, and then that's how they came together to be able to create it. And apparently they would have all kinds of different musicians come into the studio that would give that Motown sort of vibe, and then that's how they would create each and every single
That's why I think in terms of like just having Outkast's richest compositions, this is the album that you're gonna find it on. In terms of even some of their best storytelling, you obviously have the two parts of the art of storytelling. Even a song like Nathaniel, and just that whole concept of someone sort of going through the system and wanting to get out. Like, it's genius writing from them, and it's them at their highest level, bro.
Not only that, but I'm not sure if you ever knew this, but I think West Savannah was actually made in 1993. I believe.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was made. It wasn't made in the sessions like that. They had it from 2 albums before, and they ended up including it. I was reading an article on it. But what's cool too is that like you even have them talking about fucking technology on this album. Like, that's what I love about Outkast, is that it's completely different than what everyone else was doing, and they were able to dominate in their lane. And what's cool too is that like Andre 3000 was going through like a different time period in his life. He had just broken up with his girlfriend, and now he was dating Erykah Badu, and that's when he started to get his eccentric style and started to dive in a bit more into art. And they started to also realize on this album how powerful their voices were in music and how much potential they had if they were able to create this unique formula. And that's what I think was executed on Aquemini.
Absolutely. And even looking at stuff like the actual title track, and to see how philosophically driven they were on this album, just rapping about, just real life shit, bro, like how nothing lasts forever, and the duality of different events and circumstances in life. It's just one of the best funk rap albums I've ever heard. But Let's move on to the last year that we have for today, and it's 1999. Another stacked year, and this was tough just because Black on Both Sides by Mos Def was making a serious push for me, bro. Like, we both know what the best album of that year is, but, but Mos Def, bro, really brought it with Black on Both Sides.
Slim Shady LP by Eminem as well. I Am by Nas.
Things Fall Apart by The Roots.
Operation Doomsday by MF Doom. This was a serious year. Imagine like doing podcasting throughout these 90s years and being able to talk about all the moments and being able to actually be live in action. Think about it. We're close to like 4 decades after, and we're still talking about this and being able to create professional.
Oh yeah, I think people are
going
to talk about these records like even 100 years from now, bro. I think as long as like music exists as an art form, these are the records that people are going to go back to and study and analyze. But yeah, when it comes to 99, I mean, there could be no other but
it's
2001.
Yeah, this is like ultimately, I think, the best.
What could we say that we haven't said already about this album?
I mean, you guys know how much I love this album. This is, in my opinion, the greatest hip hop album of all time. And I mean, I could kind of go more into like the background of the album because I guess maybe I never really talked about that, and I just talked about like my personal preferences with it. So, Dr. Dre was actually at a really low point in his career when he created this album. Like, this was a massive comeback for him because he didn't release a studio album, solo studio album, since The Chronic in 1992, and a lot of tabloids were just questioning his legitimacy as a producer and as an MC, and just questioning like, hey, are you still like, do you still have it? You know, are you able to go, like, let's say go with this, and are you able to run with it? And it was also at a time where he met Eminem, and that whole thing ended up starting one of the greatest duels that the hip hop genre has ever seen. And, you know, the Slim Shady LP comes out the year alongside 2001. And what Dr. Dre said was the inspiration for this album was making it feel like a movie.
Yep.
Like making it feel like you were sitting through a legitimate movie. He's like, everything was calculated. Even something like Pause for Porno was calculated because he says every good movie has sex in it. So it's like, I had to put it in there, you know? But it's true, though. You go to something like, let's say, Lightspeed, you know, with the whole Bar 1 sort of thing coming in together, and you feel like you're on the scene with Hitman and Dr. Dre in the bar talking to these chicks. Or even, let's say, something like The Message, something so deep and profound. And, I mean, the album obviously had ghostwriters for Dr. Dre. You had, you know, Royce the 5'9", you had Exhibit, you know, you had Eminem.
Eminem
had
writing
Jay-Z.
for Dre as well.
You had so many
It didn't matter,
people.
though, just because it felt like, to me, like that album was just a celebration of the West Coast sound. It felt like a celebration of Dre's capabilities as a producer, him reworking all those samples and playing them live again, him, you know, enlisting the talents of someone like Scott Storch, who went fucking brazy on the pianos. I mean, it was just an album like no other, and it felt like, again, going back to this album today, just the crispness of it, bro. Like, just how loud and how vocal Dre was with the production in terms of having a certain bounce and having just these great flips, bro. Even looking at Murder Inc. and him reworking that whole Halloween score, that shit is... Those are the types of beats that stick with you, bro, for as long as you'll be a hip-hop listener.
Not only that, but I believe it was one of the producers that worked on the album, and I was reading an article on this, and he said the process for Dr. Dre was that he would get, like, all kind, like, everyone had pagers on them, and he would page all of his producers at one time, and he was like, okay, we have a session, we're about to cook. So he would have someone, let's say, on the keys like Scott Storch, and then we'd have a bass player and everyone, and everything would kind of go towards him because Dr. Dre obviously takes care of all the drum work. And then what would happen is that Dr. Dre would isolate each and every single musician within the studio session, and he would tell the musician how to make their compositions better to be able to fit his drums. And that was the kind of process that Dr. Dre was in, where it was just like this perfectionist mode. Like, you want to hear perfection on a hip-hop record? I don't think you're going to get better than this.
Yeah, and I think like,
in all honesty,
the only flaws I ever hear about this album is like, oh, it's too materialistic, it's too misogynistic, but that's the whole fucking point. You know what I mean? You're going through this album and you're going to hear about Snoop Dogg wanting some head. You know what I mean? Like that's what you're in for. It's literally like, to me, it was sort of like taking all the gangster rap cliches and exploding them, kind of playing into them and showing you what it really is to be the most heightened version of the gangster rap genre that you could possibly get. And you ended up getting a masterpiece, bro.
Top 10 album of all time in my books. The
Absolutely.
best album of all time in my books. And listen, guys, if you actually want to check out the episode that we've been referencing throughout the entirety of this episode, Top 10 Albums of All Time by NFR Podcast, you guys could click it right here. But Lou, how do you feel about the lists today, man? Awesome shit.
I think they were strong, bro. I think that we had a lot of obvious picks, but I mean, we still had our certain, like, you know, fill-ins like Mecca and the Soul Brother and a couple other ones that were...
AT-Aliens for
AT-Aliens too. We had a
Absolutely.
couple of surprises in there,
We
but
did. I had Outkast twice on my list, actually.
and I had Nas twice on my list, which is pretty
guys.
interesting.
So
but-
listen, guys, in the comment sections, let us know how you feel about our selections, and let us know, do you think the 1990s are the best decade for hip hop? Thank you guys so much for watching this, and we'll catch you in the next one.